Ellie.
Ellie, yeah,
Okay.
that's who you were supposed to go into.
I was in the service, station Camp Grant, Illinois. And I was living in this BOQ, Bachelor Officer Quarters, okay, with other bachelor officers. There were about 7 or 8 of us living there. And one fellow was a dentist, Lieutenant Maurice Singer was his name, Singer. And he had befriended a girl in Rockford. And they were going out quite a bit. And one day he came to me, he said, my girlfriend is having a party, and she's got this girlfriend of hers who will be attending, and she's looking for someone to go with this girlfriend. So he says, I'd like you to come with me. I said, I won't go on another blind date if you kill me. I've had them, and I don't want to go on a blind date. So he kept after me. And the next day he said, Jerry, you got to come. I said, no, forget it. So then 2 days later he kept after me. He said, look, I promised my girlfriend that I'm going to bring you. So I said, bring somebody else. She doesn't know who I am. No. So anyway, one day he came to me, he said, look, Jerry, if you'll come with me, I'll take your OD assignment 3 times in a row. That means officer of the day. That means you're on duty 24 hours. You don't sleep, you can rest, but you have to walk and check your area to make sure everything's okay. People are soldiers are all right, you know. So that's an onerous duty. He says you would take it 3 times. Well, this now the price is getting interesting. So I said, okay, I'll go with you. The night that I was leaving, I called my sergeant and I said to him, look, I'm going to this party and I'm not too anxious about going there, so here's what I want you to do. 10 o'clock, you call this number, and if I'm having a good time, I'll say thank you, okay. If I'm not having a good time, I'll say, Sergeant, I'll be right over. So that's what happened. I went to the party and met Ellie. 10 o'clock, the phone rang, and they say, it's for you, Lieutenant. So I get out there, yeah. No, it's okay, I'm sure you can handle it, Sergeant. So he says to me, it's that good, huh? So I said, yeah, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Okay. And he hangs up, and I stayed, and that's how I met Ellie.
What year was that, honey?
1944. And so then we started to date a couple of times. And then I was transferred to Camp Barkley, Texas, after having dated her 2 or 3 times. And we were in Texas for about 4 weeks. There were a group of us, 36 of us to be exact, that were receiving special training as assistant surgeons. So we had to go through this training, and that's another story. So
you were being a surgeon?
36, yeah.
He didn't hear you. You got to speak louder.
You were going to be a surgeon?
No. Assistant surgeon.
Oh, okay.
Administrator.
Okay.
No, not administrator, surgeon. Bandages, iodine, you know, surgeon.
Okay.
It's not
What was happening at that point of the hostilities during the war, our casualties were very, very great. And they're running out of doctors, because we had battalion aid stations up front. The doctors were being killed. So they wanted to find assistant surgeons, trained people to give first aid until the soldier or the wounded person could get back to where there's adequate help. So we were the experiment. 36 of us were being trained as assistant surgeons. So after that training, we came back to Camp Grant, and we went out once, Ellie and I got orders, you're leaving. All 36 of us were going at one time. They said, send your equipment and uniforms home and just keep your tropical uniforms. So we packed up everything and sent it home. And we went on this, it took us to the railhead, which was right in Camp Grant. There were these 2 sleepy cars, 2 Pullman cars on the siding there for us. 36 of us going in these 2 Pullman cars. And we didn't know where we were going, they wouldn't tell us. So we get on, and we all have these Valpaks, we call them, bags that you could open up and hang up. our uniforms are in there. And one guy, Riley was a great guy, there's a porter, each Pullman car has a porter. So they were helping us on with the bags. Then Riley's standing in front of me, and he says, "I'll carry this myself." And he lifts it up, and you hear think, think, think. You hear clinking of bottles and glasses. He had the whole thing there.
Yeah.
So
And a
he
whole
was,
liquor
we
cabinet.
got to handle this very carefully. So he puts it on the train himself, and then he says to the fellows in the car, there were 18 of us in each car, he said, "Okay, everybody," he passes the head around, "everybody give me some money." Okay, we give him some money. He takes it all to the porter, and he says, "Here, you take care of us. Keep us in ice, and wherever we need some help, just be there for us." So, "Yes, sir," you know, and it gave him quite a bit of money. He said, "When we get to our destination, we'll give you more money." Money meant nothing, you know, because you didn't know what the heck was happening to you. So, we got in these Pullman cars, and sure enough, the train pulls up, they hook us up, and they take us out. And this happened to be a very fancy train called the Hiawatha, which goes from Chicago to Milwaukee. So we said, "Well, this is, no, we're not in the train, we're just being hooked up to it with that carrying us." So they took us to Milwaukee, and they said, "Well, we know we're going north. What do we got trappables for?" Then suddenly it's a bump. The train leaves, and we're there. We're still at the station, so they unhooked us. We waited several hours, and this other train comes along and hooks up to us. It's a troop carrier, and they had hundreds and hundreds of troops on this thing. And we're on these two cars. We don't have any food, nothing. So sure enough, one of the officers from the troop head comes in. He says, "I have orders to feed 36 officers." "Well, that's us." "Okay, and we have rations for you." So they were taking care of us. So they said, "Where do we go to the food?" He said, "We'll bring it to you." "Oh, that's service, you know." Sure enough, a couple enlisted men come with big cartons, and this is our rations. We open up, they're sandwiches, bologna sandwiches. They said, "We can't live on this." "You'll live on it." So that troop train took us as far as Reno, Nevada. Reno, Nevada, they dropped us. We're waiting for another train. And we're getting hungry again. You know, you get hungry every day.
Well, you're a young man.
But we have nothing there. So I said, "Well, let's go out and buy some food." You know, Reno, Nevada, the station is ground level. So, okay. So another fellow and I said, "We'll go out and get some sandwiches." Well, we didn't know when the train was going to... Another train hooked us up, and they were getting ready to leave. We don't know when they're leaving. The porter said, "You know, you can't leave. We may leave any minute." I said, "Well, yell out." He and I ran down the street, it's Main Street, we saw a deli. So I ran in there, and I said, "I need 72 sandwiches in a hurry." So the guy says, 72 sandwiches, what kind? "Anything, whatever you got. But I need 72 sandwiches, and we're going on this train." So and I threw a lot of money on the counter. So he says, "Okay." He and his helper, they spread bread, the white bread, rye bread, pumpkin. They're smearing mustard on it and everything else. They're throwing bologna, they're throwing Swiss cheese, they're throwing everything on it. And they packed everything up, put it in a box, and we ran. And just as we're running, we hear beep, beep, beep. Train's honking. So the two of us run, and everybody's yelling, come on, we don't need you, but we need the food." So we ran, and we got into the train, and the porter helped us up. Meanwhile, the porter renewed his storage of ice and soft drinks. He found us a bunch of soft drinks. And so that we had rye, bourbon, and scotch. And so some of the fellows stayed half-crocked for the whole trip. We played cards, we did everything. And the train that they hooked us up to in Reno was a cattle train.
Where were you going?
Huh?
Where were you heading?
California.
Oh, okay.
A cattle train. And it smelled. The cattle were up front, and the wind was coming. It was horrible. And then they dropped us off, and another troop train took us, I don't know where. Anyway, we ended up in Marysville, California, right next to Sacramento. And this fella, Riley, who had the liquor, he also had a girlfriend. And they were inseparable. So she was following us. Wherever the train went, she went.
How? With a car?
Yeah,
Oh.
she was driving. And every once in a while, he looked out, and her name was Celia or something. There she is. The trains weren't going very fast, but she was.
Well, weren't you going to like a boot camp?
Huh?
Weren't you going to like a boot camp or something in California?
Marysville, California, was a camp,
Yeah.
and it was a staging area.
It wasn't boot camp though.
Oh no!
He'd already been through boot camp before
Okay.
he became
Okay.
before he became an officer.
Okay.
So we stopped off, and the funny thing is, we no sooner got into our quarters. They assigned quarters for us. There's a knock on the door. There's Celia.
Did her mother know she was there?
Nobody knew she was there, but she found us. And Riley says, "Oh boy, this is great." And we're all tired and getting ready to go to bed. He takes the mattresses off the bunk and he says, "We're going to sleep on the drill field." So that's where he and Celia slept, out on the drill field.
What a nosy girl.
No?
In those
Really?
days.
So
My
6
goodness.
o'clock in the morning, there's a knock on the door. He's coming in. He doesn't want to be caught on the drill field.
But why? How Chicago? You were going to tell me how you got to Chicago.
Well, okay. I met Ellie in Rockford.
Right.
She was working at Camp Grant.
Right.
Okay, now I dated her for a few times, and I forgot about her. Gone. We're now in California, and from there I went to Fort Lewis, Washington, to await a boat which took us to Hawaii. I was in Hawaii for about a year and a half, and I was getting lonesome. Then I remembered this girl, Eleanor Weinstein. And I said, well, I'd like to get in touch with her. She was nice. I got in touch with her, but I didn't know how. So I remembered where the party was held. The girl who had the party, her name was Becky Rubin, and she lived in Rockford. I don't know what street. So I wrote a letter to her, and I addressed it, Becky Rubin, Rockford, Illinois. And in there I said, you know, I described who I was, and I remember meeting Ellie at this party. Do you know where I could find her? If you have an address for her, I would like to communicate with her. I sent this letter, and 2 weeks later I got a response. The mailman found her. Wouldn't happen today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But the mailman found her, she got my letter, and she responded, yes, of course we remember you, and Ellie lives here, and here's her address, blah, blah, blah. So I started to correspond with her. And a year and a half later, approximately maybe 2 years, the war was over, I'm coming home, and they took me back to California. Hamilton Field, just north, I think, of San Francisco. I don't think it exists anymore. But that was my first taste of California, other than going through Marysville. And that was just at night. I stopped off at this place in San Francisco, and the war was over now. We were being sent home. Well, I looked around, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And they had a shuttle bus, took us from the camp to downtown San Francisco. It was a dirt road, and it went through an area with beautiful trees and shrubs and flowers, and the air was crisp and bright. It was absolutely gorgeous. So I said, why should I go back to New York? This is gorgeous. So I went to the commanding officer. I said, can I get discharged here? He says, no. He says, the regulations require that you be discharged at the camp where you entered the service, which was Fort Dix, New Jersey. Nobody in his right mind wants to go to Fort Dix, New Jersey. But, so, now you wait here. Because of your rank, you have to have a Pullman car. You can't go in the troop train. So I was there for about 5 days, going back and forth to San Francisco. Really enjoyed it. They finally gave me they found a reservation for me, and they gave me my ticket. None of the old tickets were ever, they were about 2 yards long. They were about 3 inches wide, and each,
Wow.
they were like
Each
coupons,
segment.
each one was
I never
for a
saw-
segment.
I never
Yeah.
saw that.
And, but the segment, you know, the trip from Sacramento all the way, no, San Francisco, all the way to Fort Dix, New Jersey, had umpteen stops, and every stop you needed a ticket. This thing was about 2 yards long. They rolled it up and give it to you. But anyway, so I got on the train, we got to about Fargo, North Dakota. And I knew we were stopping in Chicago. So I said to the porter, I want to send a telegram. You could do that those days. So sure, and they wrote up a telegram, addressed it to Ellie, and I said, I'm going to be in Chicago such and such a day. I don't know where I'm going to be, but I know there's an officer club. Every big city has one. So I'll be at the officers club in Chicago. Can you meet me there on such a day at approximately this time? And sure enough, pulled into Chicago, got in a cab, and you're all dirty. Those trains were steam engines, you know, and they soot and everything. So I said to the cab driver, take me to the officers club. Yes, sir. And he drove me, and the officers club was the Knickerbocker Hotel, right over here, which is, the building is still here if you want to visit. It's still a hotel, in fact, right across the street from the Drake. And it's still called the Knickerbocker. And I came there, and they had 2 floors reserved for USO. I came in there, and they gave me a room to dress and everything. Well, I came into the hotel, and there she was, sitting in the lobby. So I greeted her, and was very happy to see her. And I checked in, they gave me the key for my room, and she came with me. We get in the elevator, the bellman says, sir, says, you have a single room.
Ladies allowed.
And she was so embarrassed. He wouldn't let her come into the elevator with me. So I said, okay, wait in the lobby. She was ready to, you know, she was very embarrassed. So I said, okay, you wait here, I'll go upstairs and shower and change my uniform and come down. And so, a half hour later, whatever it was, I came down, fresh uniform, I felt much better. And the clerk said, you know, you can have the room for the day. But, so I did, I stayed there. But, so we went out to dinner, and we renewed our acquaintance. And then, I decided, she's kind of nice, I want to spend some time in Chicago. But my ticket said I had to go on to Fort Dix. So, in those days, I had a lot of chutzpah.
You still do.
And so I went to Fifth Army headquarters. I found out Fifth Army is right in Chicago. I went to Fifth Army headquarters, and I walked in and I said, I want to see the adjutant. The guy just looks at me. The adjutant is a lieutenant colonel, and the commander is a lieutenant general. And I come in like I know everything, and I wanted to see the adjutant. He says, what about? I said, I want to extend my trip. I want to change my orders, spend a week here instead of just going on east. I said, but they were very accommodating. He says, where have you been? And I told him. He says, how long has it been since you? I said, about 2.5 years. Yeah, whatever you want. So they came up there, they took my orders. Instead of reporting to Fort Dix on such and such a day, he says, when do you go on? When do you want to go there? So I said, make it 5 days later. I said, okay. So they changed the orders. And so I spent 5 days in Chicago, and I went out with her every night and met her family, you know. And so then I went home, I was discharged, and then I used to come back and forth to Chicago from New York. And to show you the advances of transportation, there was a train called the Pacemaker, or the 20th Century, the 2 of them. They both went from New York to Chicago and back. The 20th Century was strictly Pullman and sleepers, roomettes and stuff, and the Pacemaker was strictly coach. So I took the Pacemaker, and from New York to Chicago was 17 hours. They have the same train today, but it takes 19 hours. 50 years later.
My God.
Yeah, well, they haven't maintained the the railroad system in this country.
That is
Terrible.
sad.
So anyway, I used to go back and forth, and finally we became engaged. And that's
You
how
were
I
so
met.
lucky that she was still waiting for you because she hadn't heard from you in
Well,
over
yeah.
a year.
I don't know. She must have been going out with other guys. I'm sure she
Yeah.
knew some fellows there because she
You're
showed
lucky
me some
she didn't get
pictures.
snapped up. This is what I
Oh,
meant.
whatever. You know. So we finally decided to get married. But her family had very little money. My family didn't have any money. I had saved some money, and in fact, when I got back, Sidell said to me, "Jerry, can you lend me some money?" I said, "Yeah, whatever you want." She wanted to have her nose fixed. And so I said, "Okay." So she goes to my mother, says, "I want to have my nose fixed." "Why do you want to do that?" You know. So she says to me, and my mother right away was against it. So I said to my mother, "Look, she wants to have her nose fixed, let her have her nose fixed. Where are you going to get the money?" "I'll give her the money." And she's, okay. So I gave her the money. I don't know. It was about, those days it was maybe $500, which was a fortune. But I had been forced saving for the Army. You had to send the stuff home. So she had her nose fixed. And then we decided to get married, Ellie and I. And meanwhile, I had re-registered CCNY. I had had a year, so I decided to fit. Now, to show you how smart I am, when I came out of the Army, under the GI Bill, I could go to any university in the United States. I had my choice, any place. Harvard, Cornell, University of Pennsylvania, California, and I went to a free school.
But say the full name of it.
No,
honey.
no tuition.
Honey, say the full name of it.
CCNY, everybody knows
Say it.
CCNY.
No, they don't. No, they don't. Cal-
City College, New York,
City College, New York.
had a great reputation in those days, academically. And I had finished 1 year, and I wanted, first of all, I was in a hurry to get through, and I didn't want to live out away from home. I had that for 5 years. I don't need it. And so I went back to school, a free school, and I could have gone, as I said, to any expensive university. They would have paid the tuition. Plus they gave us an allowance to live on.
Stipend.
It was very nice, yeah. GI Bill was good. So we got married in 1947, February of 47. And
Do you remember the date?
February 2nd, 1947.
And when you were in the Army,
Yeah.
where were you stationed most?
The first place was, first I went to Fort Dix.
Yeah.
From Fort Dix I went to Camp Pickett, Virginia. Then from Camp Pickett, Virginia to Camp Barkley, Texas.
So you were never outside of the United States?
No.
During the war?
No.
During World War II? So you were in the United States the whole time?
Well, then I went to Hawaii.
Then you went to Hawaii.
At that time it wasn't Hawaii.
What, at that time
It wasn't part of the United
Right,
States.
exactly, yeah.
And you were 23 when you got married, right?
It was a
Big
possession
You were
of the United
both, you and
States.
Ellie were both
Yeah.
23 when you got
We were
married.
22, not quite 23. Got married in February. My
Oh yeah,
birthday was April.
April, right.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So,
That's what they did in those days.
but so our honeymoon was in Washington, but we got married in Chicago, and the next day we took the train to New York. Of course, I had to register for class. Hadn't finished school yet, so I had to register for class. So we stayed in New York for 2 days while I registered, and then from there we went by train to Washington, D.C., and that's where we spent our honeymoon.
What I'm really curious about is, during World War II, when you were enlisted in the Army, did you know about what was going on in Germany
No,
at all?
no. None of us did.
That is just so amazing to me.
We found out about it the same time you did. And the troops were in an uproar when they heard about it. Then they showed us pictures, newsreels and all that stuff. And, well, Eisenhower didn't know about it. He was shocked. You see pictures of him going through the concentration camp, and he was just devastated. There's a picture of him, and George Patton was next to him.
So no one in the United States knew?
I wouldn't say that no one, I didn't know.
Yeah, in the Army, but you
We
didn't know.
about it. We had, we had the Army publications and never mentioned it. So we didn't know about it. And,
But you knew about Hitler.
oh sure, I knew about it before I went in the Army. Hitler was 38, 1938.
But you didn't know what was going on with Hitler.
We're very much aware of what was going on. In my room, in 1938, I had a big map pinned on the wall, a map of Europe. And I had pinpoints of where the German troops were. And I was following them. Every night I read the paper or listened to the radio, and I moved those points so I knew exactly where the fighting was and what was happening. And at that time, France capitulated, and it was a mess. I mean,
But the concentration camp stuff was kept
I didn't
under.
know about it. No.
Yeah.
And that came out later.